Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I want to talk about 6 different books that I absolutely adore. I really enjoyed reading these books for a number of reasons, but I think all these books have 3 main things in common. The first would probably be the writing style. I really enjoyed the author's writing style for each of these books. A lot of them are very humorous and witty, but I also think they offer really refreshing and unique insights. Another thing is that these books are very easy to read, in my opinion. I think if you're in a reading slump, these are really great books to just zoom through, but you also gain so much from it. I just think it's easy to read, easy to follow, easy to understand. And lastly, I think all of these books cover really interesting topics, which is pretty much why I was drawn to them in the first place. And they just continue to keep you like hooked throughout the book. So I really enjoyed these books. I hope you can read them and let me know what you think of them. And if you like them, that's amazing. I love talking about books that I love. So I hope you get a chance to read them. I also want to quickly say that when I make a recommendation for a book, I'm not necessarily saying you should go out and buy it. I think you can do a little bit more research also to see if this is really a book that you would want to purchase. But even then, there are so many ways you can read a book without actually purchasing a physical copy. And people tend to equate like a recommendation with like the act of consuming or like going out to buy something. So I think I might make a video on like how to read books for free. Not might, it's already like an idea that has been in my head for a while now. So anyways, enough rambling. I'm going to talk about these books. The first book is called Eat Up by Ruby Tandoh. And let's just take a second to appreciate this cover. It is so cute. And the back is also really cute. And that's initially what drew me to this book. But it's also about food. So I study food in my graduate program in sociology. So naturally, I wanted to pick this up. And I think this is such a fun, easy, and positive book that celebrates food. And when I was reading this, I just felt warm inside for a number of reasons. But this book mainly covers a lot of things about food. It covers the history of food, the different ways we eat food. It talks about food portrayed in media and movies, food as a source of power, as a source of comfort. It talks about fad diets and the diet industry in general, body positivity. So many things are covered in this book. And I love the way the author writes because she brings it in the forefront of your mind in such an accessible way. So talking about these very complex topics in a way that's really easy to understand. So I really appreciate this book for that. I think my favorite part of this book would be the casual references to Filipino cuisine. She mentions that her girlfriend is half Filipino, so she's pretty familiar with Filipino foods, and she'll just casually like name drop different foods and dishes, and I don't know how to describe it other than it made me feel normal. Like it made me feel like being Filipino and my culture was normal. I don't really know how else to describe it, but I just felt like seen. And I think when a book makes you feel that way, it's a really touching like moment. That's why I really, I guess, adore this book, because it just made me feel like I wasn't an outcast and that my culture and my food isn't something to look down upon, but actually something to celebrate and embrace. The next book is called Trick Mirror by Tolentio. I believe she's Filipino and she's from Canada, but I also really love this cover because you can flip it around like a mirror and it's a reflection. So this says Reflections on Self-Delusion, and overall this is a collection of essays about cultural criticisms that the author has, and she talks about things like social media, constructing self-image on the internet, rape culture, beauty standards, optimizing. There's a chapter that I really enjoyed. I think it's the one on optimizing. Yeah, always be optimizing. So I want to read a quote from page 80. It says, "The default assumption tends to be that it is politically important to designate everyone as beautiful, that it is a meaningful project to make sure that everyone can become and feel increasingly beautiful. We have hardly tried to imagine what it might look like if our culture could do the opposite. De-escalate the situation, make beauty matter less." Yeah, I hope that quote encouraged you to read this and got you a little excited, but I think this is a great book to read if you are younger. And I definitely see myself recommending this to a daughter if I had one, or a niece. But overall, I really liked this book. I do see myself revisiting it again, and if you do read it, let me know what you think. The next book is called Wordslut by Montell. I also really like this cover, but this is the same author who wrote the book Cultish. If you've seen that, it's a pink cover. I think it got really popular because of the title and the cover, but it's also a really good book about cults. Anyways, I really enjoyed this book. It deconstructs language, so talking about things like pronunciation, grammar, cursing, insults, and how those aspects of language have historically oppressed women. And I just love her writing. You can see the passion and the feminism in her writing. And she's a sociolinguist, and she got me so interested in that topic and how powerful language is. One of my favorite parts of this book is when she explains why women tend to use fillers like the word like. So when women talk with likes in it. And I thought that was such an interesting section of the book. I felt like I had a lot of aha moments while I was reading this book, and that made me feel very empowered. I also want to read something off of here. Let's see. Gently advising women to stop using discourse markers and vocal fry so they can sound more articulate, no matter how well-intentioned, is not helpful either. In 2016, I was offered a promo code to test out a new voice recognition app designed to help young people practice talking without filler phrases like, you know, and like, so they could sound more authoritative. But dressing up this advice as empowering is as shady as telling a woman that wearing a longer hemline will make her worthier of success. It's a way of punishing women for their own oppression. One of our culture's least helpful pieces of advice is that women need to change the way they speak to sound less like women, or that queer people need to sound straighter, or that people of color need to sound wider. The way any of these folks talk isn't inherently more or less worthy of respect. It only sounds that way because it reflects an underlying assumption about who holds more power in our culture. Overall, I learned so much from this book, and I think as a writer, she is so eloquent but also very witty and humorous, and I think that's what made this book so entertaining. Next up, we have Thick by Tressie McMillan Cottom. She is a sociologist, and as you know, I study sociology in my graduate program. I also got it as my bachelor's degree, but I just love sociology, so I was really excited to read a book by a sociologist. And this is also a collection of essays, and I love essay collections, so naturally I had to read this book. This book covers a range of topics that are very deep, political, controversial at times, and she really makes it accessible and easy to understand for anyone. So she talks about race, privilege, misogyny, capitalism, academia, and beauty as well. In particular for beauty standards, she talks about why we value beauty in the first place and who actually benefits from determining who's beautiful and who isn't. And I think a lot of those ideas overlap with Tolentio's notions on beauty in her book Trick Mirror. So I really like that relation. But overall, as a writer, Cottom is so relatable, and she's also very like witty and clever, and she just makes everything easy to grasp, especially with a lot of her personal anecdotes that make it more enticing. I want to read a quote from this book. So on page 41, in the chapter In the Name of Beauty, she says, "If I knew to be cautious of men, I did not learn early enough to be cautious of white women." I think that's such a memorable one-liner. On page 58 in the same chapter, she says, "Capital demands that beauty be coercive. If beauty matters at all to how people perceive you, how institutions treat you, which rules are applied to you, and what choices you can make, then beauty must also be a structure of patterns, institutions, and exchanges that eats your preferences for lunch." If you've read this or are reading it right now or plan to read it after this video, let me know in the comments. But nonetheless, I am planning to reread this book myself. The next book is Dear Dolly by Dolly Alderton. I've mentioned this book before, but I really did enjoy this book. And I also love Dolly Alderton as an author, mainly since I've read her book or memoir, Everything I Know About Love. I read that twice already, and I hope to reread this one also. But basically, this book is set up like an advice column. So she's responding to different questions that people sent in, and she's giving her advice on the topic. The book is separated into 7 different sections. So these are the 7 sections. There's dating, friendship, relationships, family, sex, breakup and exes, and body and soul. So you can imagine, based on those sections and the cover of the book, and if you've read her previous books, that this book is advice on breakups, on dating, on social media, relationships with romantic partners, family, friends, loneliness, divorce even, having children, love, and everything in between. I want to read a quote from the book. On page 74, it says, "Loving someone is not an act of control, it's an act of surrender. You can make careful considerations about who you choose to merge your life with, but from there you have to let go. The alternatives are to choose to be on your own, makes a lot of sense, or to be with someone whose infidelity you wouldn't care about, so you feel totally safe, miserable. You have to surrender to the unknown variables of another human. Know them, trust them, and hope for the best." And this was a response to a letter that started off saying, "Dear Dolly, I checked my boyfriend's phone while he was sleeping. Now I feel so guilty." And it basically is structured that way, where there's like the headline and then the rest of the question, and then she starts responding in a letter. So I just really like this book because it's very relatable, relevant, and refreshing. The last book is called Goodbye Again by Jonny's son. And this book is a mix of stories, poems, reflections, short little essays, and illustrations. I think it's another really quick read, but it's also very relatable. So the topics include loneliness, anxiety, depression, navigating change. There are a lot of plant metaphors in here, so there are a lot of illustrations of plants right here. So this is the page that I'm reading off of, 161. It says, "On mourning. Mourning does not only apply to death. You are allowed to mourn change as well. You can mourn an old home that is gone, or a world around you that has shifted so imperceptibly until one day it no longer feels familiar anymore. You can mourn your own changes too. That you are no longer the person that you used to be is, in my opinion, a good reason for mourning. It may be a cause for celebration sometimes too, but you can also give who you once were a send-off, a memorial, before you move on from them." So I read this when I moved across the country, and it really resonated with me. I think I just turned to this book as a source of comfort and healing. And because my life has changed so much since then, since I moved, but then also from moving to now, I really want to read this book and feel those feels again. when I read it the first time, and I think it's also going to be slightly different because I'm in a different place in my life now, but I do find this to be a great book to just reflect, and I see myself like journaling right after reading this. So those were all of the books that I wanted to share with you for today. These are books that I absolutely adore, books that I would recommend to anyone, and books that I feel like have a really special place in my heart. I think mainly because of the time period which I read these books in and the place in my life when I read these books. But overall, I do recommend these books. I hope if you check them out, you enjoy them just as much as I did. And I'll see you next time. Bye.